Trey, while we're waiting to start, is it possible for you to play some music or hum for us? Like, can you sing while we're just waiting?
Yeah, let me just do that. Let me and to I think in the to be mindful of time, and we'll play around with the time. I'll say that, the group's small enough at this point. My ideal is to have more spaces. Fridays are usually pretty good for me, one of my work from home days throughout the week. So ideally, I'd like to do this maybe every Friday, maybe every other Friday. Kind of a casual space is just building up to the election. I don't necessarily love Spaces as a platform, but it's one of the easiest to use and for people to jump on and interact that kind of thing compared to like a full blown live stream and all of that stuff. So in addition to our weekly podcast, this is just the easy thing for me to kind of jump on and host conversations that I think people are really interested in. Hopefully, they can be informative. We might, we'll see how the quality of these things go in terms of do we throw it on our podcast feed, things like that. Maybe, probably not, just kind of quality wise and things like that. And maybe it'll entice more people to join us. Maybe we adjust the time. Maybe we'll figure that another time is more suitable for folks. This works kind of good for me. Maybe 10 a.m. Eastern time works a little bit better. We'll see. But I'll try to keep this kind of a tight hour as well, just to be respectful of everyone's time. And I asked my friend Jason to join me to kick things off in terms of discussing the crypto for Harris town hall that occurred. What was this Wednesday night? So 2 nights ago. Jason, why don't we kick things off? What are some of your initial thoughts, initial impressions with the town hall, with the event?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I want to say that I walked away from that town hall meeting feeling that there were some positive things and feeling that there was a couple of negatives coming out of that. And I'm not sure. I mean, maybe we probably want to focus on some of the positives and moving forward. But I feel like first and foremost, I think maybe it should be said that this is a group that, in 2 weeks of planning and, not existing to like there being a Twitter profile and it existing within 2 weeks, getting some of the most important people in the world, right? Like if you're having Chuck Schumer get on your webinar and talking in positive terms about crypto policy, like that is an impressive of win, right? So maybe I'll just start there and say like putting together a town hall in that way in that time period and getting the support from not just Democrats, but like highly positioned elected leaders who actually wield power is an impressive feat, and I just hope that the conversation continues and it doesn't end where it ended the other night. For those of you who maybe aren't too familiar with the political system in the U.S., having somebody like a Senate Majority Leader speaking about legislation and policy is in many ways more important than whatever presidential candidates say. So, they just wield different kinds of power within our political system. So that was really impressive. And I'm glad that that happened and that conversation started. I think for many of us who consider ourselves Bitcoiners, the obvious headline frustration is what was a lack of Bitcoiners represented in that space, differentiating it from crypto. Um, and and I understand that. So I understand that when you're talking about politics and you're expecting politicians to speak about these kinds of things, they are not in a position, and probably won't be for a very long time, to differentiate between Bitcoin and crypto just on a political front, right? They don't want to pick winners. They don't want to seem biased. They need messaging that goes out to the people that people can understand. And like crypto as a word is something that people at least have a vision of. And a lot of normies out there really have a hard time with this distinction, like Bitcoin, not crypto, whatever. Some of the things that we say within our own community doesn't really translate to like regular people. So on a political front, I understand that. I don't have any illusions that any presidential candidate is going to be able to like articulate a Bitcoin is different than crypto policy, and really go from there. So that is not my expectation. What I would hope for, and what I tend to look for with people who I ally with and work with and have reasonable conversations with, is if you're not strictly a Bitcoiner, you don't have to be Bitcoin only, but you do have to recognize that Bitcoin holds a special place in the ecosystem, and really attack it from like a Bitcoin kind of a Bitcoin first stance. And what I saw the other night on this town hall was a lot of people who were mentioning, like Wiley Nickel, for example, was mentioning Bitcoin by name specifically. Other people were mentioning the properties that describe exclusively Bitcoin within the ecosystem, but then mentioning other crypto tokens on par with Bitcoin. And then you had people who, Mark Cuban comes to mind, who were specifically showed like animosity towards Bitcoin specifically. And I just think that's a really bad look, right? So I think I'm going to start there by saying that the town hall itself is probably a good first step. I really hope, I don't have any evidence and I don't know, but I really hope that the Harris campaign picked up on this and sort of took note. And that, I do think that we need to have conversations with the people who are running this Crypto for Harris group and try to get them to at least nudge towards an understanding that like we need a little bit more Bitcoin first conversation about what the policy should be, what are the benefits of Bitcoin, why is Bitcoin different from everything else in the space, and why are some of the benefits that we progressive Bitcoiners are always fighting for and advocating for, like why is that possible under a Bitcoin system but not any of these other crypto tokens? And I think that conversation can still happen and probably will happen for the next several years. But those are my top line takeaways. I'm happy to get into anything more specific, but that's where I'll start.
Yeah, that's great. I of course agree with a lot of that, and I'll add a little bit too. I think for folks on this spaces or those that listen to the recording, I think one thing to keep in mind, and none of this is necessarily me saying I have full faith and trust in Kamala Harris or in Donald Trump or in whoever, right, is in I think the role of a politician or the role of these congressional people is to piss off the least amount of people as possible. At least that was the old view. Like Trump has his own cards to play by. And that's one of the reasons that you're not necessarily going to see Harris or Schumer or someone come out and start talking about Bitcoin versus shitcoins or these kind of things that we might agree. Like, imagine that you are, and I know this is going to be hard, and I am Bitcoin only. That is the only focus. I try to look out at the crypto ecosystem that so that I have some reference to kind of know what I'm talking about sometimes with other coins or other things when people have rebuttals to, well, what about this versus Bitcoin, right? So I try to be a little bit educated, but really it's not my expertise, and I probably should know more because there's quite a bit of rebuttals. But I'm focused on money decentralization, Bitcoin. That is my focus here. But imagine if you're like an Ethereum bull or a Monero bull or something like it, and you see a politician or someone, they don't want to lose these voters. They don't want to apply policy. Now down the road, I think policy will have to look differently for different things, right? We still have some that are quite frankly pump and dump scams. Like there are some that are very, very clearly that. And there are other crypto projects that are a little harder to say that's clearly a pump and dump, right? There's a full spectrum of all of these coins. So initially, we are still at the early adoption phase. So these politicians are going to approach things from a crypto digital asset, technology forward, using broad language. And again, I'd applaud Chuck Schumer and his team. I think being a New York Democrat, seeing that, listen, if we don't start taking this seriously, it's not going away. We've ignored it for years now. It's clearly still around. Other countries are going to start to lead on it. We're going to look really silly as the US, a tech hub, not knowing what we're even doing or talking about when it comes to crypto. I think I detect a lot of frustration from a lot of Democrats in Congress just saying, like, why are we not acting on this? Now, I might agree on ways they want to act. We have yet to see what that looks like, right? And if that includes anything that remotely resembles a backdoor ban, I think, quite frankly, we'll have quite an uproar from this community and many others being like, no, we're not going to go in that direction, right? And there's a lot of other things that could come with that. I'm not too worried about that from a legislative or Harris or admin angle right now. But I wanted to set the stage as well. With that's why they're approaching crypto in this way. I think it's sending a lot of huge and strong signals. And the other thing I'd add too is there's a lot of Bitcoiners in the space that I think get really impatient and really frustrated. They're so focused on the echo chamber of Bitcoin. You got to realize a lot of these crypto for Harris people and others are real political operatives. And I don't mean that in a negative connotation. I mean they really know how the political process works. They know what these campaigns focus on, and they're just trying to push the needle and say this can't be ignored. Let's try to get to a better place on this than we previously have been. And I would love to see Democrats just walk back from the cliff that they've set on, right, to a neutral spot, and then we can all move forward. We can all, devs can be free to build and feel safe and comfortable in this country building. Bitcoiners can feel safe and comfortable doing self custody and businesses and mining and all of this stuff, right? So it's important that we keep this up, but we're still so incredibly early. Kamala Harris's campaign is maybe a month old at this point, not even. They have a lot of other priorities on their plate. So we're probably not going to see a set crypto policy from Kamala Harris between now and the election. I'd be very surprised. Maybe there's some hints or some leaks from different folks, right? We still have yet to see. I know she's taking quite a Warren approach on other policies. She may do that with Bitcoin and crypto as well. We have yet to see. I think she'll have a much harder time with that given the number of Democrats that we saw just on that call and behind the scenes that are like, we're not going in the way of that. We're going to actually want to pass some legislation on this that allows people to use and build on Bitcoin and get things going. That is the sense I'm getting. I'm not going to place a bet on that right now, but that's just what I see. So for Bitcoiners to understand the political process is messy, it's frustrating, but there are a lot of people focused on trying to do this in the right way. I think Bitcoin will be okay. So yeah, Jason, I'll let you chime
I
in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just want to add to that a couple of points, right? Like, I definitely think that in general, if I was to generalize like Bitcoin's like the Bitcoin community stance on like what kind of policy we want is just exactly what you said is like be neutral, let miners mine and pay for the electricity that they use, let people self custody. And you know, just sort of let us be, and like you said, walk back from sort of the edge of the cliff that they position themselves on. At least some people in the Democratic Party have done that. I was heartened. I mean, we didn't even see all of like sort of the pro crypto digital asset Democrats on that call, right? Like Ro Khanna has been like on the front lines of like pushing his party towards sensible policy stances for a long time. You know, he showed up to Nashville and spoke to the Bitcoin conference, right? He wasn't even on that call. So I do think that Elizabeth Warren, as much as like Bitcoin community wants to use her as a punching bag, like is becoming less and less relevant. It's going to be harder for her and for people like Democrats like her to really stick to their policies. There's going to be some pushback, and it's hard to see if you're in that echo chamber where you're just going to people are going to be tweeting out headlines about how Elizabeth Warren is the devil and like everyone's going to like it. It's just kind of hard to see the nuance, right? I think that's one of the things I've realized over the past, let's say, 8 months, is that we know Bitcoiners are very highly attuned to like how the financial system works, and they know a lot about economics. There are quite a deal of people in the Bitcoin community that I'm seeing that really need to brush up on like civics, like how does the government work? How does it not work? What are things that you think are bugs that are actually features within our system, like the fact that things are inefficient and take a long time, and there is debate, and we can't just push a button. So I feel like all of that stuff, all of those things are going into this conversation. Like we would love to see X. Why can't we just have it? Why can't Democrats get on board? Well, we're going to be fighting and deliberating and debating all of these things, and for now, Bitcoin fits under a digital assets umbrella. So if you want to have a policy that protects Bitcoiners to do X, Y, or Z, but also stops scammers and shitcoiners and pump and dumps, like that's not an easy needle to thread necessarily, right? Like in terms of people who are legislators who are coming up with policy who are not expert in this topic, right? This is one of 100 things that they really have to care about. So I feel like that's worth noting. The other thing that I'll note is that um, New York State is represented on at the federal level by exactly two senators. And New York State is also the hub of the legacy financial system. And both of those senators showed up on that town hall call to actually talk about sensible, common sense, pro digital asset legislation policies by Democrats, even though they are representing the state that is sort of the hub for this legacy big bank, old financial system. And I think that's probably worth noting, right? Like you have Kristen Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer both showing up to something like this, and that probably speaks volumes because it's not easy to go up against Wall Street and big banks and all of that stuff. But both of those senators from New York were on that call, and I think that's probably a good signal, if nothing else. So I'll leave it. Those are the things that sort of popped into my head as you were talking, Trey. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd say if you believe in any sort of game theory or Trojan horse theory of Bitcoin, and you apply it to Trump and Republicans, but you're not also willing to apply it to the other side, then you're just biased. Because what I'm seeing that sends such a huge signal, even if it benefits banks somehow, which is really hard for me as a progressive to see banks and ETFs and all of these folks trying to get in on Bitcoin. Well, other people are going to keep getting in on Bitcoin, right? So you have huge signals sent by Democrats. Like I heard the word financial inclusion mentioned more on that call than any other call when they're talking about crypto broadly. But I'm like, okay, we're getting closer to Bitcoin and seeing true financial inclusion understood. Because then once their teams really start researching and reaching out to folks like the Bitcoin Policy Institute and others to get some good research on what actually is this, because that still has yet to happen. It's happening a little bit like on a framework kind of side that's been happening with the SEC in terms of like what's a commodity, what's a security. They've had those kind of conversations, but we're just at the beginning stages of some senators and congressional offices being like, okay, but like what is it, like how does this work, that kind of thing. So if you believe in the game theory, this is a pretty good situation and position to be in that we find ourselves in currently in the US with that.
Yeah, and I think it's to that point, Trey. Like most people come to Bitcoin through crypto. I mean, if everyone sort of thinks back to their own personal
Yeah,
history,
definitely.
like, you say, all right, well, I'm going to go into this crypto space, and then as you increase your education and your understanding of the topics and why certain things work and certain things don't, like people gradually become more and more like, okay, yeah, Bitcoin, more Bitcoin, less of this other stuff. And I think that's important to realize, right? Like if these policymakers, these staffers, these elected representatives are in like the crypto stage now, that doesn't mean that they're always going to be there. And it's not like you said, like if the Trojan horse thing works for Trump and Republicans, it definitely is going to work for, you would have to assume it works for Democrats too, right? If we can get our foot in the door and say we want sensible legislation, sensible policies, and they're talking about digital assets and crypto and blockchain, they're just like two or three steps away from being Bitcoin only like the rest of us. And so like that's a good sign, right? I think somebody had just sent me a DM talking about, well, why is it important for like progressive policies, for things to work under Bitcoin, but not the other stuff? Like, what's the danger in the other things? And I'm just going to speak very briefly to that. I think that Bitcoin makes the world a better place. It is for financial inclusion. It's transparent. It is a fair way to transact your monetary value peer to peer with no intermediaries. Bitcoin makes the world a better place for lots of reasons. One of the troubles that I come across when I try to advocate for Bitcoin or educate people about Bitcoin is that it is pretty new and is hard to understand. And so I think that the litmus test for me is to say that if you have a cryptocurrency that is newer than Bitcoin, which of course they all are, and even more complicated to understand, like the value that you're adding by being this other cryptocurrency apart from Bitcoin needs to make up for the fact that you are imposing a reputational risk onto Bitcoin. And I think that is clear by talking to normal people out in the world day in and day out. They lump crypto with Bitcoin, and then they lump the scams in with crypto, and the transitive property says they're going to have a hard time separating that scam word with Bitcoin. So I think that that's first and foremost. Like, I just don't see the possibility of really truly fulfilling like what the promise of Bitcoin if we're still battling on two fronts, right? Which is to say, we need politicians to agree to Bitcoin, and then we're also fighting the crypto space by saying like you're just a Bitcoin maxi, and you're an elite and you're just trying to pump your bags, and all of these things, and you don't understand about blockchain, and all of these things. Like, we're fighting on two fronts, which makes it more complicated. But I have yet to see sort of a really sustained and reasoned approach to say, oh yeah, this new crypto that I have is worth the reputation. Like, it adds so much value that Bitcoin can't add, that it's worth the reputational risk that I'm bringing to Bitcoin by talking about it. So I feel like that's, for me, that's where the conversation has to get to eventually. But if for now we want to think about it as for this Trojan horse kind of thing, like, let's just get these elected politicians realizing that there are voters out there that care about this. There's a lot of people who own crypto and care about it, and they have to address that. They can't ignore it anymore. That's probably step one, right? Like, I'm envisioning down the line, we need to have more detailed and more difficult conversations. But I feel like what we're doing right now is a very good first step.
Yeah, where we're at in the history of these things, I'll just kind of give one more point and start opening it up to folks to speak. Is just a year ago, right? Well, beyond a year as well, but as recent as a year, if not more recent, we had Jamie Dimon and others saying Bitcoin is only for Bitcoin and crypto is only for criminals, scams, terrorists, all of that. Now we've got them scooping up Bitcoin. We have that baked into. So that was a year ago, right? We've had Democrats going completely against Elizabeth Warren, saying that and saying that crypto, it helps with financial inclusion. There's a lot of people unbanked, all of this stuff. They're using financial inclusion and unbanked regularly. And that's like 20 Democrats in Congress at least, right? Richie Torres, I know, was on the Galaxy podcast, Galaxy Brains podcast recently. I don't think Alex is on this podcast or the spaces right now, but just talking about these things. So they are starting to get it. My point of view is over the next like cycle, let's say the next 4-year cycle, this election cycle, the education can really begin on which blockchain, which crypto, because a lot of people will say the blockchain, the Web3, this stuff, and I'm like, which blockchain? Like, what are you talking about? We have to get more specific. So year after year, we're getting there on the education front, and I think after this next political cycle, the next 4 years, people will start to see, okay, this is the difference between Bitcoin and this other crypto asset. If they want to use some other crypto asset for some blockchain, like I don't know, a special project or whatever, go for it, right? But what I feel positive about is we're getting to a place where less and less lawmakers are willing to say we should ban crypto because it's only for terrorism, and more into a place of like, how can this work? Let's work with this. That is a huge signal shift, and that does not mean that they won't put out, Elizabeth Warren can't still put out legislation, that crackdowns won't still come. I'm not sure about that, but I'm feeling less and less worried about that given the number of politicians that are talking about that. And the other thing I wanted to mention as well is that it seems more and more likely that at this point, Kamala Harris has a very good chance of becoming our next president. It's still a toss up, right? But the last 2, 3 weeks, it was not. It was assumed Donald Trump would become president. So understanding that, we're also looking at that. And I've talked with a lot of folks in the space that are saying we're kind of preparing and seeing for a Kamala Harris administration. So keeping that in mind, if you're a builder, if you're a dev, whatever, if I'm given opportunities personally to talk and have any influence so that they're not going to crack down unfairly and I believe unconstitutionally through some emergency efforts, I'm going to take that opportunity to try to talk, right? If that is going to be our fate anyway, as a Democrat leader, and them being, hostile, can they be less hostile, right? That's kind of the position we're in. But overall, I'm feeling more hopeful. Feeling more optimistic where we're at, and I think there's a lot of good things we can go off here. But if anybody wants to start jumping in, and Jason, if you wanted to add one more thought before I open it up, see if there's any
No,
requests
I
here for
just
anybody to
wanted
speak.
to agree. I am more hopeful now than I was like 2 months ago. That said, this presidential race is still pretty much a coin flip, right? Like the lead that Harris has is still within most margins of error,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
the electoral college does funny things, and we have a candidate on the other side that is sowing the seeds for denying any sort of result in which he doesn't win, right? So it can get
Sure.
ugly. So, all of which say, don't be complacent. Like people are saying, oh, well, we need to prepare for a Harris win or whatever. Like that may be true, but it's certainly not a done deal, and there could be a lot of ugliness between now and then. So I'll just add that, and then we can open it up to anyone who wants to speak.
Yeah, I agree. I want to say two more things just to close it off. So one, so that everyone on this call knows, like myself and others, like I have even additional meetings set up with a couple of the organizers from Crypto for Harris. Right, this was the kickoff event. I I'll just say this. I personally tried to get more Bitcoiners on the call, on the Crypto for Harris call. I was really trying to get Bitcoin, whether it's I tried with the resistance money guys, I tried with others to speak specifically on Bitcoin. We were in talks to do so. There was some scheduling conflicts, and then more and more congressional members were showing up to speak. And they're like, Trey, we're with you on this, but we've got like, over a dozen congressional leaders willing to speak and interested. And I said, okay, for the first call, I get it. I get it. That's fine. My anticipation is that we're going to have more events and more opportunities at these kind of larger town hall type things to express specifically what Bitcoin does. And I'm talking about, Human Rights Foundation, what Bitcoin does, resistance money, what Bitcoin does, from academic philosophers, right? These kind of heavy hitting, you cannot ignore Bitcoin at this point, specifically for these events. So I've got several calls scheduled with them just to brainstorm how we can get more Bitcoin in there, right? Kind of being so what everyone on this call who considers themselves left or progressive or Democrat, keep posting stuff, keep using the hashtag crypto for Harris, as silly as this seems sometimes. Keep trying to push out this viral message that Bitcoin is for progressives in the left just as much as anyone else, because we're going to have to keep combating the Donald Trump narrative. And I'm trying to also talk with Mark Cuban, whether it's on the podcast or off air, so that he can stop putting out messages that say, Bitcoin is for just Bitcoin maxi Trumpers, right? Or something like that. I get what he was trying to say for the event, but that's bad optics. I don't want anyone from the Harris campaign picking up on that and saying, yep, Bitcoin is just for Trump. We're going to focus on crypto. That's this new thing, and that's better than Bitcoin. Bitcoin is this shiny rock that, Trump MAGA people will play with, right? So that I'm trying to get that narrative to stop. Let's stop that in its tracks. Let's not continue to go down that path. And lastly, I'll also say, because a lot of Bitcoiners were about this, well, if there's any more risk with Democrats than Republicans or Trump, why not just vote for Trump? And I will say, anyone who is left or progressive or Democrat, there's no chance in hell you would even consider voting for Donald Trump. So let's just get that's just the reality of where these things are at. So, and that's why I put out a tweet recently just saying, like, you do not have to compromise your values on a host of other things to be interested in and advocate for Bitcoin. Because a lot of Bitcoiners are asking us, progressives and left, you should vote for Donald Trump if you really care, right? And I think that's complete bullshit. That is not something that you need to do or have to do. There's more fight that we can do to make the US a really great place for Bitcoin, for digital assets, and a safe place for devs, anyone working on Bitcoin, things like that. So I will shut up now. It's just there's been a lot of thoughts in my mind this past week, which is why I wanted to have this. So if anybody wants to speak, please raise your hand. I know we've got one speaker up here already. Feel free to jump in here.
Hi, Trey. Hey, Jason. Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate uh, both of your reflections and also your work in this space in the progressive aspect of Bitcoin for years. I've been seeing what you guys are doing. Um, and as for the reflections on this Crypto for Harris call, I agree. There's how to put it? Yes, there's a political process, right? And it takes time. And many of us who've been in Bitcoin a long time and we recognize the difference between Bitcoin and crypto, uh, we also have to recognize the political process. They're coming into it. There's a lot of nuance to organizing. My own background, I'll tell you briefly. I got into union organizing as a student in college because of our campus janitors, and segued into grassroots organizing. And then I spent some time in the Obama administration during his first term. And um, it's normal for us who've been in Bitcoin a long time to want to see, uh, you know, the distinction between what a blockchain is and these altcoins. Um, it's easy to get frustrated when there's a lot of nuance to this, right? Um, but yeah, as far as the event, just to reflect on it, I agree with both what you and Trey and Jason were saying. Pros and cons, but mostly I'm feeling positive and optimistic that the doors are opening, that the speakers, the Congress members that were involved, they'll learn, the education will come. And Trey, to your most recent point about Bitcoin maxis being Republican or for Trump and Democrats going more crypto. I mean, Bitcoin will be fine without Donald Trump, and the U.S. will be okay if we don't rush into a national strategic reserve. Even though I do believe that's going to happen. Um, in fact, the more time before this all happens, the more time for people around the world to stack sats. I've spent the past 10 years living abroad, frankly. Um, I spent a few years in rural Zambia, and I'm in Asia now. And uh, my own perspective here is that seeing the ability for people around the world where it's really needed as a form of freedom money, where there's financial inclusion, like this, it's okay for it to wait a little bit for us in the West, for the US, right? Like Bitcoin will be more distributed among people who can benefit from the store of value. Like, in Zambia, they've had over 100% inflation in the 5 years that I spent there. From 2018 to 2023, the Kwacha exchange rate went from 10 to 20. 100% inflation is a 50% loss of purchasing power. That my friends in the community where I was, we were feeling that pain on regular purchases, gas for your car, if they even had vehicles in the rural areas. There's not much. But anyway, my point is to say more time for people in the rest of the world to stack sats isn't a bad thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm just going to respond quickly. I appreciate those comments too, because I feel like one of the frustrations I've had over this past summer is sort of the top-down approach of like let's go into a closed room, let's court Trump, let's convince him to say good things about Bitcoin that he doesn't understand, um, that he's just sort of openly using it for its political clout and absolutely has no uh, deep or inspirational thoughts about Bitcoin at all, right? That's a top-down approach that has frustrated me. And what we saw on the call and conversations like this, and even after, like the Zoom or the space that we're on after the town hall crypto for Harris, was more of like a deliberative debate, like bottom up approach. And that takes time, and I've said multiple times, like, I don't think that it was smart to really force Bitcoin to be like a US presidential campaign issue in 2024. Like it's just it's not, to your point, like it's good for the rest of the world to have a chance to sort of stack sats and to be educated and to have the store of value. I think that we're just jumping the gun a little bit. And that's been a frustration. So I'm okay with the messiness. I'm okay with things taking time. I'm okay with there being deliberations, and I'm even okay with like political leaders in Congress being pro crypto before they realize that maybe they need to be pro Bitcoin. I'm okay with all of that. It just becomes a little bit more urgent when we have a very high profile, high net worth, like highly influential people in the Bitcoin space, like getting Trump behind closed doors one on one and promising him like huge campaign donations, and then sort of pressing the issue, right? Like making this a 2024 issue instead of like a 2032 issue. And I've said that multiple times. So I appreciate that sentiment. Like we need the rest of the world to get on board. We need voters to be educated. We need people in Congress, like people's elected representatives, to be educated. And it seems like we're starting that process, and we are like on step one out of 1,000. But you know that. I'm not bothered by that. We just need to make sure that we win the election also as we go along and talk about all of the other stuff we like to play with, our crypto and our Bitcoin.
I see one other hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. As I've spoken to you guys before on other spaces, I was on that spaces that was the other night with those two shitcoiners who put it together. And as somebody that
Sorry,
I
if you're
campaigned.
speaking, I can't hear anyone.
Oh shit! You can't hear me?
Oh yeah, he's speaking. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you guys hear me? All right.
I can hear you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
So
I can't.
I
Maybe I'll leave and join again. Sorry.
I campaigned for Bernie, and I don't actually think that Kamala Harris is a progressive. As I've said before, I think it's just virtue signaling. And she's going to the point now where she's actually proposing crazy shit like $25,000 for first-time home buyers, and which is just going to make inflation roar even more. But I just my question would be, how are you guys going to, being that you're aligned with this crypto sort of like wing, how are you guys going to handle the fact that you are going to end up being in situations or spaces with these people who are, in some cases, outwardly scamming, just the general public? I would think that would put you in an awkward position, and it would probably suit them because it gives them some legitimacy, being that they're aligned with people that are in Bitcoin only. What do you say about that?
I would try. I mean, that's a really great point, and that's one of my one of my things. So the crypto for Harris thing popped up. I knew one of the organizers previously who does pack work in New York outside of crypto. They saw when it was announced that Joe Biden would be stepping down, Kamala Harris would be stepping in. They saw a little bit of shifts on the back end from Democrats about certain policies that they felt were like quietly no one was talking about, crypto being one. So they decided to capitalize on it, started this Crypto for Harris X account, and just went from there without a huge roadmap, with no corporate or industry necessarily funding or support or influencers or that kind of thing. And so he reached out to me. It was like, hey, we're doing this. What do you think? Yada yada. And I'm like, well, I want to talk about Bitcoin. I want to focus on Bitcoin. I'm really worried that people only associate it with one political party. I want to push Bitcoin to a nonpartisan thing. I'm not into other cryptos. Like him and I have talked about this before, and he knows my position on it. So for me, it's more of an approach, and this might not fully satisfy your answer, which I understand, but for me, it's more like having a connection and having an invite or a seat at the table to have some sort of influence, so that it's not only crypto and in some cases shitcoins. Like some of the people talking about blockchain that were on the town hall, I couldn't tell you what they do or what it's about. I honestly just have no idea. Right. Luckily, most of that was politicians talking in that area. So my hope is just to have any shred of influence, to have a little more Bitcoin there that typically would not be there, because a lot of the other Bitcoin advocates, for better or for worse, they've decided we're going to go to these Trump roundtables. The Democrats have dismissed them, which I think is unfair. Like, a lot of the mining companies and things like that have done full-throated endorsements of Trump. So they're just not invited to these things. I think that's wrong. I think they should be. And I think many of them would gladly attend. And I'm also trying to say Bitcoin miners should be here. I've said that many times to these organizers. I've said that on X many times to try to say that Bitcoiners should be here. So I'm hoping to have some influence. And listen, some of you might come back to me and say, well, look, that didn't work out. And I just don't know. But the only thing I know to do is try and try my damnedest. And I know Jason and many others are as well. while we have the ear of some of these people and hope that it plays out in a good way to have some influence so that it's not just crypto and scams. And we'll keep talking about why we're Bitcoin only and being specific about that. So that's just to say your point, but I hear your point loud and clear.
And
Thanks.
I'll agree. I'll agree. It's a valid point, and I think Trey's making pretty much the best answer you can, which is to say like these are the conversations happening. Like, can we get a seat at the table? I'll give you guys a little bit of behind the scenes. Right, the X space that happened at 9:30 right after this Crypto for Harris town hall. I was invited to speak to, and I declined out of hand because I took a look at who was organizing it. And I am not against going on a podcast or a show or a space with somebody who is into crypto. But I need an opportunity to express to them, like, here's my stance. Like, I'm Bitcoin only. If you're okay with me getting on your show or your space and talking about that and talking about why I'm Bitcoin only, then I might be willing to do it. And I just didn't have a chance to do that. I was invited pretty late to the game. So like I turned down an invitation to speak at that event, Wednesday night for that reason. And so I want to be at the table. I want to have conversations with people, and I also want to meet people where they are, right? Like I said earlier in this space, a lot of people start off crypto and end up Bitcoin, right? And I feel like if there's elected representatives, if there's Congress people and senators, if there's operatives and staffers who are crypto right now, like I have faith that they might be Bitcoin one day, and I'm willing to talk to them. But I'm not going to necessarily like you'll never hear me say like, oh yeah, crypto is the way to go. Unless it's some avenue to just meet people where they are and to help push the like why is it important for the U.S., for marginalized communities, for like the world in general to be on this Bitcoin system. I'm going to take opportunities to speak my mind about that, but only in situations where I feel like I can like hold on to what I feel is important. And so, it's not the first time that I've turned down invitations to speak to people because I felt they were too, crypto centered or scammy or whatever. You can fill in the blank. But I do think that these conversations have to happen, and we do need to warn people and to educate people about the reputational risks that crypto has on Bitcoin and the way that the general population feels about these things and how intertwined they are. I feel like that's a really serious problem for sort of the image of Bitcoin, and I want to work to rectify that.
Yeah, I'd agree. So I had a chance to connect with Brian Kresenstein before the spaces just to talk about this, and I used my 5-7 minutes, whatever it was, late at night. I was super tired to just kind of sound like a Bitcoin maxi for like 5 minutes to this group of super liberal Democrat crypto people, and did that intentionally. And the same with Jason. Like we have kind of request forms and things that come through the website all the time for different crypto folks. And we don't platform that. Usually I'm a bit selective as well on what I talk to and talk about. So I think Jason and I are very kind of focused on that and laser focused on this. So I couldn't agree more, Jason, with that point as well.
I mean, yeah, and just one more anecdote. Like one of the organizers of the Crypto for Harris um, town hall event was in my DMs for the past 2 months because they sent me an unsolicited message, not about the Crypto for Harris, but well before that even existed. And I did not click accept, right? Like it was from somebody I didn't know. I looked at their profile, ton of shit coins, ton of crypto, didn't even respond, didn't even know who it was, and it literally sat there for 3, 4, 5 months. And then when I was on the Crypto for Harris call, I saw, oh, that's one of the organizers of what I'm dealing with. And so just I'm not just going all in on anything crypto. I just want to be clear about that. Like, if you are crypto right now, I'm willing to talk to you about why, it should be Bitcoin first. But I'm not going to just jump in and take any invitation that I get.
Yeah, if anyone else wants to speak, we got a few more minutes here. I want to try to wrap up around 10 if possible. And I said this at the beginning. I'd like to do more frequent spaces to have these conversations with the community as we're kind of going along. as we're getting closer to the election. So I'm hoping to do these spaces more frequently, just for folks to know. This definitely is not the end of the conversation. I think there's a lot more to learn, to see as we go along here. Yeah, I see you're back in our spaces. Your hand is raised. You're a speaker, so you should be able to unmute here, I believe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe you can hear me now. Yeah, that's a good points. It's a good reflection. Uh, Man, where to begin? There's the nuance of the distinction between Bitcoin and altcoins. We don't necessarily need to get into that here. I know many of you are aware of the difference, of course. I'm sort of speaking to the choir, but it does dawn on me, and I'll share with you. You can consider this if it's helpful. Um, you know, Having been in this space, so Jason, you said people often start off crypto and end up in Bitcoin, and I do believe we are now at a point in which that is going to be true moving forward. Um, I happen to come from a time in which I remember it was Bitcoin. I started off in Bitcoin, and I remember the rise of colored coins and Litecoin, and before there was ETH, Ethereum, it was ETC, it was Ethereum Classic, which forked, right? And so, like, we have to remember our history, and people don't necessarily recognize now that yes, crypto is a scam. It is a scam. Like, if you have if you have a team that is funding something where they have a pre-mine, if even just like on that call yesterday, 2 days ago, Crypto for Harris, it was evident. It felt like aside from the fact that people were reading off their scripts, but if you simply asked them, what is a blockchain? I guarantee you they couldn't even answer that. And I have found in my years in this space, making the distinction and asking the question, what is a blockchain? And remembering it is just a ledger. It's a record of every transaction that has ever happened. And it's decentralized. It's spread out around the world on nodes that participate. And that is inefficient. It's totally inefficient to have a replicated record of every transaction, right? So, uh, unless the security created by the redundancy of a decentralized network was your primary variable of interest, then you would never choose to use a blockchain. It's just a highly inefficient database, right? And people say faster payment methods or lower fees. Okay, Zelle, PayPal, Venmo, these companies already exist. And when you use these platforms, no money is moving in the world, because they're just updating their Excel spreadsheet, right? And then you have the 3 to 5 business days of like Swift clearance and so on. But anyway, the distinction is that these altcoins, they're run on AWS, right? Amazon is a singular point of potential failure for all of these altcoins. And that's why people need to recognize the importance of decentralization. And I'm optimistic that education, I apologize for my word salad, but I think like people recognizing that, like the amount of education will increase. It already has accelerated tremendously, like Trey with this show and Jason with your book and others. The amount of education, all the podcasts, right? People are learning faster and faster than I did. It took like a long time of constant listening, and like the information has changed so much. Like in 2014 on Reddit, it used to be that like you would wait 6 months for an article about Bitcoin, and it was usually negative, but we would still get excited about it. We are in such a different space right now, and I'm incredibly optimistic. Um, yeah, I'm feeling very good. We'll get there. It's 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 just we gotta take our time with it and continue to adopt this uh, low time preference, right? And just take our time. If I might end with a question, Jason, I have a question for you. I know you walked your book through the halls of Congress, giving it out to members and your engagement. So I would love to just hear your reflections on your reception from some of the members as you've been going through this, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I mean, as Trey said, we want to be respectful of time, so I'll just try to answer that very quickly, which is to say that it wasn't just me. Like a dozen or more people, maybe 18 people showed up to volunteer and walk those Bitcoin books all around the halls of Congress too. And we weren't. It's not as if we were invited into the back room of every single congressperson, right? But we did get a chance to talk. I personally sat down with a couple of representatives and probably half a dozen, maybe up to 10, like staff members who are like sort of crypto digital assets was like their territory in advising the congressperson, among what probably among a dozen other things that was under their purview, right? Like digital assets was one of their things. So sitting down for those conversations was profoundly interesting to me, just as sort of like seeing how the political process works. How do those conversations go? Everybody was super polite and receptive in person. I don't know how many people actually read the book, obviously, probably not many. But I think that again, like to Trey's point earlier, that was over a year ago we did that, and like a lot has changed since then. So I think that, to a point that you were making, and then also one that Trey made earlier, like 1 year in this space, a lot can happen, right? And if you're looking for, if you don't have to wait 6 months for a Bitcoin article to pop up on the news anymore, right? Like it happens fast and furious. So I am hopeful that like the tide is turning, and that just the education is improving, and the information that's out there right now. If you're willing to do a little bit of work and actually be thoughtful, like there's way more information out there now than ever before, and that's great work. Bitcoin Policy Institute, Daniel Batten's out there, like just doing tireless work, combating FUD all of the time. Trey's doing good work bringing people on his podcast. So, like, we have tremendous resources all over the place, and plenty of examples that didn't exist even 2, 3, 4 years ago of people using Bitcoin in the real world, not just in America, but all over the world, people who actually really need it. So I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful. And if these politicians need me to meet them where they are because they're at crypto right now, as long as they know that I'm Bitcoin only and Bitcoin first, and that's where I'm going to come from, then I'm willing to have those conversations, and we'll see where it goes.
Awesome. I think that's a good note to end on. So, folks, thanks for coming out. I think in the future, I'd love to see some more. Whether it's interaction or other thoughts. I think we were just kind of setting the stage post event, saying that the work is just beginning. This is a years long process we have ahead of us, regardless of who happens to be in the Oval Office. I think next time around, we've got our work cut out for us all collectively going forward. We're going to probably have some crazy price action, all sorts of stuff that'll just see more and more people showing up, and Bitcoin is going to do its thing. That's how I'm feeling. So thanks for tuning in. If you don't already, be sure to follow our account, Progressive Bitcoiner. We have new episodes out every Tuesday. We're going to have a lot more, I'd say, politically focused conversations, meaning kind of behind the scenes. Like this afternoon, I'll be talking with Mike Brock. He was one of the folks that actually went to one of these roundtables that Ro Khanna put on. So I'm going to try to see what we can talk about and what he might be allowed to talk about or not on the show. That will be dropping next week. Got a fun conversation scheduled with Lynn Alden Monday that we'll be releasing the week after, getting her take on all of these things and how this could impact macro implications, and many more to come. So stay tuned for that. I am going to try to do these spaces on a weekly basis. I can't say exactly and commit to that quite yet, but expect to see more information about that, and tune in when they do. Jason, anything else on your end where people can find you and follow along?
I'm fairly sure that every single person on this call knows who I am, but you can follow me on X, or I have a website, bitcoinprogressive.com, and I need to update it, but there's ways to get in touch with me. My DMs are open, and I'm willing to work with anybody who wants to see a bright orange future.
Cool. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy your weekend.